The envelope had arrived on a Tuesday, disturbing the carefully curated peace of my Manhattan office. It was made of cardstock so thick it felt like a slab of drywall, cream-colored with the family crest embossed in gold leaf that probably cost more than my first car. The Golden Jubilee. Preston and Cordelia Thorne. 50 years of excellence. Most sons receiving such a summons to their parents' 50th anniversary might feel a swell of nostalgia or familial pride. I felt only a familiar acidic tightening in my gut, a phantom constriction that I hadn't felt since I walked out of Highclere 5 years ago. I drove my rental car, a sensible, nondescript gray Ford sedan that smelled faintly of industrial lemon cleaner, up the gravel driveway of Highclere. It was 11:30 in the morning, and the July sun in Southampton was already punishing. It was a bright, unforgiving light that bleached the color out of the world, exposing every flaw. But there were no flaws at Highclere. The estate was designed to withstand scrutiny. It was a mock Tudor fortress of stone and timber, looming over the Atlantic like a feudal lord guarding his fiefdom. The hydrangeas lining the half-mile approach were blue, an unnatural chemical blue that suggested the soil itself had been terrified into submission. As I neared the portico, the scene was exactly as I had pictured it in my darker moments. A line of automobiles snaked around the central fountain: Bentleys, Mercedes Maybachs, vintage Rolls-Royces, and the occasional Ferrari attempting to look dignified. The chrome glinted violently in the sun. Men in white jackets scurried like ants to open doors, accepting keys with the reverence of priests handling holy relics. When I pulled up in my Ford, the rhythm of the wealth faltered. The valet, a young man with a haircut that cost more than my shoes, hesitated. He looked at the Ford, then at me, unsure if I was a lost delivery driver or a spectacularly eccentric billionaire. "Name, sir?" he asked, not bothering to open my door. He leaned in through the window, the blast of humidity hitting my air-conditioned sanctuary. "Elias Thorne," I said, handing him the key. His eyebrows twitched, a microscopic spasm of confusion. "Thorne as in the family?" "Yes, just park it somewhere in the back. I'm sure you'll find a spot behind the hedges where it won't offend the Bentleys." He didn't laugh. Humor was not a currency accepted at Highclere. I stepped out onto the gravel, adjusting my suit. It was a bespoke charcoal blend tailored in London Savile Row specifically but understated. No flash, no visible labels. In the world my parents inhabited, loud branding was for the nouveau riche. True power whispered. But even so, I knew my shoes, comfortable worn leather Oxfords, would be judged. Everything here was judged. I walked up the limestone steps, the heat radiating off the stone. I was 48 years old. I was a man who had built a life, a career, and a quiet, formidable reputation entirely separate from this place. Yet the moment my foot crossed the threshold into the foyer, I felt 12 again. I was the slow one, the quiet one, the disappointment who preferred books to boardrooms. The foyer was a cavern of Italian marble and fresh Casablanca lilies, hundreds of them. The scent was overwhelming, cloying, and funereal. My mother Cordelia stood in the center of the room, positioned perfectly beneath the crystal chandelier to catch the most flattering light. At 72, she was a marvel of modern preservation and sheer willpower. Her skin was taut, her icy blonde hair coiffed into a helmet of perfection, and her eyes scanned the room like a radar system tracking incoming missiles. She was laughing at something a senator was saying, her hand resting lightly possessively on his forearm. Then the radar pinged me. The smile didn't drop. Cordelia Thorne never dropped her mask in public, but the temperature of it plunged 20 degrees. She excused herself with a practiced grace and glided toward me, her heels clicking a sharp, aggressive staccato on the marble. "Elias," she said. She didn't hug me. She didn't reach for my hands. She offered her cheek a smooth, cold surface that smelled of Chanel No. 5 and hairspray. "You actually came. You sent the invitation, Mother. I assumed it wasn't a clerical error." "Well," she pulled back her gaze, sweeping over my suit, lingering on my tie, too plain, my watch too functional, and my shoes too scuffed. "We thought it important for the whole family to be seen. Rumors, you know. People talk if there's a missing piece. It implies instability. I'm happy to be a prop for the afternoon, I said, keeping my voice neutral, refusing to let her see the cut. Just try to mingle, darling. But do be careful. Senator Holloway is here and he's discussing regulation shifts with your brother. We don't need you to bore him with your consulting theories. Keep the conversation light. Weather, golf, the exquisite lobster. I'll keep my theories to myself, I promised. I wouldn't want to overtax the senator's mind. She patted my arm, a gesture that looked affectionate from a distance but felt like a dismissal up close. Good. Your father is on the terrace. And Elias tried to smile. You look like you're attending a funeral. Maybe I am, I muttered, but she had already turned away to greet a hedge fund manager with a squeal of delighted recognition. I was dismissed. I was inside, but I was still on the outside. I walked through the French doors out to the terrace, the transition from the air-conditioned tomb of the house to the sweltering reality of the garden, almost physical. The back lawn of Highclere rolled down toward the ocean, a carpet of emerald green that cost more to maintain annually than most people earned in a decade. It was populated by the titans of the East Coast real estate moguls, tech CEOs, old money inheritors, who had never worked a day in their lives but spoke loudly about market forces and grit. Waiters in white tuxedos circulated with silver trays of champagne and chilled oysters. The clinking of crystal and the hum of conversation created a barrier of sound, a frequency I had never quite been able to tune into. And there, holding court near the jazz quartet, was Sterling, my brother, 2 years younger, 3 inches taller, and infinitely louder. Sterling Thorne was the CEO in waiting of Thorne Enterprises. He was the golden boy, the one who had played varsity lacrosse at Yale, the one who married a debutante with a pedigree as long as his own, the one who had never heard the word no without viewing it as a negotiation starter. He wore a suit that shimmered slightly in the sun. Italian silk electric blue, tailored to accentuate his shoulders. He was laughing, his head thrown back, holding a glass of amber scotch in one hand and a thick cigar in the other. Surrounding him were 3 men in their 60s, nodding sycophantically at whatever wisdom Sterling was dispensing. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and drifted toward the periphery, seeking the shade of a large oak tree. I had no desire to engage. I wanted to survive the afternoon, make my appearance, and retreat. But gravity in the Thorne family always pulled toward Sterling. He spotted me. Of course he did. He had a predator's eye for weakness, or what he perceived as weakness. Elias, he boomed, breaking his circle. The sound of my name in his mouth always sounded like a challenge. The prodigal hermit returns. The men around him turned. I recognized one Arthur Penhaligon, a senior board member of Thorne Enterprises. He looked at me with vague recognition, then a quick dismissal, his eyes sliding back to Sterling. Sterling strode over and threw an arm around my shoulder, leaning his weight on me. He smelled of single malt expensive cologne and sweat. Look at this gentleman, my big brother, the man who looked at the keys to the kingdom and said, "No thanks, I'd rather balance spreadsheets in a basement." The group chuckled. It was a practiced, clubby sound. Good to see you, Sterling, I said, stepping out from under his arm with a fluid motion. Congratulations on the anniversary. 50 years is a milestone. It is, Sterling said, his eyes hardening slightly as I escaped his grip. It's about legacy, Elias. Something you have to build, not just watch from the sidelines. What is it you do again? Freelance accounting. Consulting. I corrected, my voice steady. Efficiency analysis for distressed assets. Right. Efficiency. Sterling winked at Arthur. He tells people how to save money on paper clips. Meanwhile, we're closing a deal next month that will put Thorne Enterprises on the cover of Forbes. Again. Is that so? I asked. I hadn't heard the stock was performing that well. The last quarterly report I saw, well, the margins seemed thin. Sterling's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a twitch of the jaw. Market volatility, It's temporary. We're pivoting. You'd know that if you read the internal reports, but I suppose you don't have access to the inner circle newsletters. You're out of the loop, Eli. No, I said quietly. I suppose I don't see the newsletters. Go find your seat, Eli. We put you at table 19. It's got a great view of the hydrangeas and the catering tent. Table 19. I walked past the prime tables. Table 1 was a masterpiece of floral design reserved for the parents and the senator. Table 2 was for the board heavy with influence. Table 3 was for Sterling and his entourage of yes men. I kept walking past the fountain, past the ice sculpture of a swan, until I reached the very edge of the tent. Table 19 was shoved against the catering prep area. The tablecloth was slightly shorter than the others, exposing the metal legs of the rental table. My table companions were a deaf elderly aunt I hadn't seen in 20 years, her visibly bored nurse, and a couple of mid-level managers from a subsidiary company who looked terrified to be there, clutching their napkins like life preservers. I sat down the metal chair, scraping harshly against the stone pavers. From here I was invisible. I was an afterthought, a ghost at the feast. But the vantage point offered something else. From the shadows I could see the mechanics of the event. I could see the waiters whispering nervously to each other, their faces tight. I could see my father, Preston Thorne, standing near the buffet, his hand shaking as he reached for a glass of water. I saw him snap at a server, his face flushed not with heat, but with a deep crimson rage. I took a sip of my water. Sterling had called me a freelance accountant. It was a convenient fiction they had created to explain me away. To them, I was a failure because I didn't want their life. They didn't know about the portfolio I managed. They didn't know about the quiet acquisitions I'd made over the last decade. They saw a man in a dull suit, and they stopped looking. I watched Preston grip the podium at the front of the tent, checking the microphone. He looked tired. Not just old, exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes from holding up a ceiling that is buckling under its own weight. Enjoy the view, Elias, I whispered to myself, watching my father wipe sweat from his upper lip. It might be the last time you see it standing. The luncheon service began with a flurry of coordinated activity. A regiment of waiters in white gloves descended, placing plates of lobster salad and truffle risotto before the guests. At table 19, we were served last. The clatter of silverware and the shouting of chefs from the adjacent kitchen tent provided a discordant soundtrack to our meal. The mid-level manager next to me, a man named Henderson, with a comb-over that was fighting a losing battle against the wind, tried to make small talk. "So you're the other brother?" he asked, keeping his voice low, as if speaking to me was a violation of protocol. "I am," I replied, slicing a tomato with surgical precision. "I didn't know Sterling had a brother. He never mentions you. I mean, no offense." "None taken," I said. "I'm sure he doesn't find me relevant to the narrative." At 1 p.m. sharp, the jazz music stopped abruptly. The chatter died down as my father, Preston Thorne, tapped a silver spoon against his crystal goblet. The sound rang out sharp and piercing in the humid air, demanding attention. He stood up, adjusting his silk tie. At 75, Preston was still an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with a mane of silver hair that he wore like a crown. But up close, through the zoom lens of my observation, his eyes were darting around the room, assessing, calculating, terrified. "Friends, family, distinguished guests." Preston began, his voice booming with that practiced boardroom baritone that commanded obedience. 50 years, half a century. When Cordelia and I started this journey, we had nothing but a small office in Brooklyn and a dream. A polite, enthusiastic ripple of applause moved through the tent. It was a lie, of course. Preston had inherited a small fortune from his father, Silas, and a robust network of contacts. But the self-made myth was better for branding. It sold better. We built Thorne Enterprises on grit, on vision. And today, as I look out at this gathering, I see the future. He gestured grandly toward table 3. I see my son Sterling. Sterling stood up, waving to the crowd like a conquering hero returning from war. The applause was raucous. "Sterling," Preston continued, his voice thickening with manufactured emotion. "You are the architect of our tomorrow. You have the killer instinct, the fire that this family needs. You remind me of myself at 30, hungry, unstoppable." Sterling beamed, raising his glass to his father. "It is a comfort," Preston went on, "to know that when the time comes to pass the torch, it will be held by hands that are strong enough to carry it. Not everyone is built for the weight of empire." The air in the tent shifted. It became thinner, sharper. I knew what was coming. I put down my fork. I placed my hands on my lap, interlacing my fingers to keep them from trembling, not from fear, but from a sudden boiling rage. "We have 2 sons," Preston said, his tone shifting from pride to a sort of benevolent, pitying softness. "And we love them both. But we must be honest about nature, mustn't we? Some are eagles born to soar above the clouds, and some—" He scanned the crowd, bypassing the senators and the CEOs, until his eyes locked on table 19, way in the back next to the garbage cans. "Some are content to stay in the nest, or perhaps walk beneath the trees." Every head in the tent turned. 300 people, the elite of New York, looked at me. I sat perfectly still. "Elias is here with us today," Preston announced, as if revealing a charity case he had graciously allowed inside. "Our quiet one. He chose a simpler path, a safe path. While Sterling was closing deals in Tokyo and London, Elias was finding himself. And we support that. The world needs consultants too, doesn't it? Someone has to double-check the receipts for the men who make the decisions." A wave of laughter rolled through the tent. It wasn't warm laughter. It was the jagged, uncomfortable laughter of elites who are relieved the target isn't them. It was the sound of a pack turning on the runt. Sterling was laughing the hardest, shaking his head as if to say, "Classic Dad, always telling it like it is." "So," Preston raised his glass higher, the sunlight catching the crystal. "To Sterling, the future, and to Elias, thanks for coming. Try the cake." The humiliation was surgical. It was designed to strip me of any dignity, to establish a hierarchy so clear that no one would ever question who mattered and who didn't. My face felt hot, pricking with blood, but I didn't look down. I didn't fidget. I stared directly at my father. I held his gaze across the sea of linen and crystal until he blinked and looked away, unable to hold the weight of my silence. The aunt next to me tapped my arm, oblivious to the massacre that had just occurred. "What did he say, dear? My hearing aid is buzzing again." "He said he's glad I'm here, Aunt Martha," I said gently. "Oh, that's nice. Pass the butter." I passed her the butter. Inside the last tether of loyalty I had to this family, the thin, frayed rope of obligation that had kept me coming back for holidays, kept me sending birthday cards, snapped. It didn't break with a bang. It broke with a silent, definitive severing. I waited 5 minutes, just enough time for the conversation to resume, for the guests to forget the awkwardness and return to their lobster. Then I placed my napkin on the table, folding it neatly. I pushed back my metal chair and stood up. I wasn't going to storm out. I wasn't going to flip a table. I was going to leave, drive back to the city, and finish the paperwork that was sitting on my desk, the paperwork that would change everything. But as I reached the edge of the terrace, putting on my sunglasses, a hand clamped onto my elbow. "Where do you think you're going?" It was my mother. Her voice, usually a melodic instrument of social grace, had dropped an octave. It was a hiss, sharp and desperate. Her hand was clamped onto my elbow, her manicured nails digging into the fabric of my jacket and the flesh beneath it with shocking strength. I stopped and turned. The sunglasses hid my eyes, which was fortunate because I was fairly certain they betrayed a level of contempt I wasn't ready to show yet. "The lunch isn't over, Mother, but I am. I think I've played my part sufficiently. The court jester has been mocked. The golden boy has been toasted. I'm driving back to the city." "Don't be dramatic, Elias. Your father was just making a speech." You used to have a sense of humor. I have a fine sense of humor, I said, looking down at her hand until she released me. I just don't find it particularly funny being used as a punchline to prop up Sterling's fragile ego in front of the entire eastern seaboard. You can't leave, she whispered, stepping in front of me to block my path to the driveway. The mask of the perfect hostess was slipping. Beneath the layers of foundation and the perfectly frozen forehead, I saw something I had never associated with Cordelia Thorne: panic. Not yet, we need to talk. We just talked. Or rather, Dad talked at me. This is business, Elias. Real business. She glanced over her shoulder at the party, ensuring no senators or hedge fund managers were within earshot. Her eyes were wide, frantic. Come to the library. Now. Your father and Sterling are waiting. I frowned. The pieces didn't fit. The party is in full swing. Why would the guests of honor leave their adoring fans in the middle of the dessert course? Because this is more important than the damn party, she snapped. The profanity shocked me. My mother didn't swear. She viewed it as a sign of a limited vocabulary. For her to curse meant the house was on fire. Curiosity, that dangerous old instinct, took hold. I wanted to see what could possibly terrify Cordelia Thorne. Fine, I said, checking my watch. 10 minutes, then I'm gone. I followed her through the servants' entrance, bypassing the main foyer to avoid the guests. We walked down the long mahogany-paneled hallway that led to the library. The transition was jarring. We went from the blinding, suffocating heat of the terrace to the climate-controlled, museum-like chill of the house. The hallway was lined with portraits of ancestors, stern men in waistcoats, who had built railroads and stolen steel mills. They seemed to glare at me as I passed. Cordelia opened the heavy oak door to the library and ushered me inside. The room was a sanctuary of wealth. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with first editions that no one ever read, a fireplace large enough to roast a boar, and a Persian rug that cost more than my college tuition. The air smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and stale cigar smoke. Preston was pacing behind his massive desk, a glass of water in his hand. Sterling was slumped in a tufted leather armchair, swirling a glass of dark amber liquid Scotch neat. He looked less like a golden boy now, and more like a man trying to drown a screaming voice in his head. When I entered, Preston stopped pacing. "Close the door, Cordelia," he commanded. She clicked the latch shut and leaned against it as if preventing an escape. The silence in the room was heavy, pressurized. I was about to leave, I said, remaining standing near the center of the room. I didn't want to sit. Sitting felt like submission. "So whatever this is, make it quick. I have a 3-hour drive." "Sit down, Elias," Preston said. It wasn't a request. It was an order from a CEO to a subordinate. "I'll stand." Sterling let out a scoff, a wet, ugly sound. "Always difficult, even when we're trying to include you." "Include me," I laughed dryly. "Is that what that was out there? Inclusion?" It felt more like a public evisceration. "Forget the speech." Preston waved his hand dismissively, as if erasing the last hour of my life. "That was theater. That was for the shareholders. This is reality. We have a situation." "What kind of situation?" Preston looked at Sterling. Sterling took a large gulp of his drink and refused to meet my eyes. He stared at the ice cubes as if the answers were frozen inside them. "The market has been unkind," Preston said, choosing his words with the care of a bomb disposal technician. "Liquidity is tight. We have a short-term cash flow issue. A temporary bottleneck. We need to liquidate a legacy asset to bridge the gap until the next quarter." "Okay," I said, sensing the trap but not seeing the teeth yet. "You have plenty of assets. Sell the yacht. The Sea Witch must be worth 10 million. Sell the Aspen house. You only use it 2 weeks a year." "Those are leveraged," Sterling muttered into his glass. "Everything is leveraged." Preston snapped at him, then turned back to me. "Except one thing, the Montana tract." My blood ran cold. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. The Montana tract. 15,000 acres of pristine wilderness near Bozeman. It was the land my grandfather Silas Thorne had bought in the 1940s. It wasn't an investment to him, it was a church. He had taken me there every summer when I was a boy. We had fished the Gallatin River, slept under stars so bright they made your chest ache, and walked for days without seeing another human soul. It was the only place I had ever seen him truly happy. It was the only place I had ever felt like I belonged in this family. "Grandfather's land?" I asked quietly. "You want to sell it?" "We have a buyer," Preston said, his eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. "A developer. High-end ecotourism. They want to put in a luxury resort, a signature golf course, private chalets. The offer is $60 million, Elias. 60 million. Grandfather specifically stated that land was never to be developed. He wanted it preserved. He called it the lungs of the family." "He's dead," Sterling shouted, slamming his glass down on the side table. Ideally the coaster, but he missed, and the condensation ring stamped the mahogany. "He's been dead for 20 years, and we are alive, and we need the capital, the company needs it." "So sell it," I said, testing them. I knew the answer, but I wanted to hear them say it. "Why am I here?" "You're the executors." Preston sighed, rubbing his temples, as if speaking to a slow child. "Because of the way the damn trust was written. Silas was a stubborn, sentimental old mule. The deed is held in a generational trust. To sell the land, or even to mortgage it, the deed requires the signature of all living male heirs." The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The invitation. The family unity. The sudden interest in my presence. The text messages from my mother last week, asking if I was dating anyone serious, checking for potential heirs. "You need my signature," I said. "It's a formality," Cordelia interjected, stepping forward from the door. Her voice was wheedling now, sickly sweet. "Just a signature, darling. And we're prepared to be generous. We'll cut you in. 5% of the sale. That's $3 million, Elias. Think of what you could do with that. You could buy a proper apartment. You could stop this consulting nonsense and retire." They didn't invite me to celebrate their marriage. They invited me to butcher the last piece of my grandfather's soul to save their own skins. 3 million, I repeated. To let you turn Silas's sanctuary into a golf course for the people currently eating lobster on your lawn. "It's a lot of money," Sterling said, leaning forward, his eyes bloodshot. "Don't pretend you're too good for it. Everyone has a price, Eli, even the saint." I looked at them, really looked at them. They were desperate. They were cornered animals in silk suits, and for the first time in my life I held the keys to the cage. The silence in the library stretched thin and brittle as spun sugar. Outside, muffled by the heavy velvet drapes and triple-paned glass, the faint sound of the jazz band played on a cheerful, ignorant tune for a sinking ship. "Noah," I said. The word hung in the air, simple and absolute. It didn't echo, it landed like a stone. Preston blinked, his brain seemingly unable to process the syllable. "Excuse me." "No," I repeated louder this time. "I won't sign. Grandfather Silas made me promise the summer before he died that I would protect that land. He knew you. He knew you would try to sell it the moment he was in the ground." "Silas was senile," Preston spat, his face reddening, the veins in his neck beginning to bulge. "By the end, he didn't understand modern economics. That land is a dead asset, Elias. It generates zero revenue, it consumes property taxes. It's a burden." "It's a sanctuary," I countered. "It's the only thing in this family that is pure. It's the only thing we own that wasn't bought with leveraged debt or corporate rating. And I won't let you pave it over so you can cover your bad bets." I walked over to the fireplace. Above the mantel hung a massive oil painting of Silas Thorne. He was painted in his 60s, sitting on a rock by the river, a fly rod in his hand. He had stern eyes, gray as a winter storm, but I remembered the warmth in them when he taught me how to cast a line. He was the one who taught me that value and price were two different things. A lesson Preston had never learned despite his Wharton degree. Elias. He had told me once sitting on the porch of the cabin while the rain hammered the tin roof, "Your father chases the loudest coin. You must learn to listen for the quietest truth. That is where the power lies." I turned back to face the living members of my family. "Why do you really need the money?" I asked. 60 million is a drop in the bucket for Thorne Enterprises. Your market cap is supposedly in the billions, unless— I paused, studying the sweat glistening on Sterling's forehead. "Unless the bucket has a hole in it." "We are restructuring," Sterling shouted, jumping to his feet. He swayed slightly. "It's standard corporate strategy. We need liquidity for a pivot." "It's not restructuring," I said softly. "I've read the industry reports, Sterling. I know about the failed merger in Singapore. I know about the class action lawsuit regarding the chemical dumping in Ohio that you've been trying to bury. You're not restructuring, you're drowning." "You don't know what you're talking about," Cordelia shrieked, her composure shattering completely. She marched toward me, her finger pointed like a dagger. "You are a small, petty man, Elias. You're jealous of your brother, jealous of his success. You want to ruin us out of spite because Daddy didn't give you the big chair. Success." I pointed at Sterling, who was now refilling his glass with a shaking hand. "Look at him, Mother. He's terrified. He knows that if he doesn't get that 60 million, he misses the debt payment next week. And if he misses that payment, the creditors trigger the default clauses." Sterling went pale. The glass clicked against the decanter. How do you know about the debt payment schedule? That's internal, that's confidential." I ignored the question. "I left this family 5 years ago because I couldn't stand the corruption. I couldn't stand watching you cut corners, crush small vendors, and lie to shareholders. I went out and I built a life based on what grandfather taught me. Integrity, patience, hard work. You call me a failure because I don't have my face on a magazine cover. But I sleep at night. Can you say the same, Sterling?" "Oh, spare us the moral superiority," Preston sneered, rounding the desk. He looked massive, a bull preparing to charge. "You're an insignificant consultant, Elias. You check boxes for a living. You have no leverage here other than that signature, and you will sign. Because if you don't, I will make sure you never work in this industry again. I will blacklist you. I will sue you for breach of fiduciary duty to the trust. I will bury you in so much litigation you'll be begging for a public defender." "You can't bury someone who built his own foundation," I said, meeting his glare. "And you can't sue me for upholding the explicit wishes of the trust's grantor. I read the bylaws, Dad, better than you did." "You ungrateful little bastard," Preston hissed. "After everything we gave you, the education, the lifestyle." "You gave me a checkbook," I said. "Grandfather gave me a compass. I know which one is worth more." The air in the room was toxic, thick with decades of resentment. Preston was breathing heavily, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He realized that threats weren't working. He realized that the son he had dismissed as weak was standing immovable before him, so he changed tactics. He replaced the stick with a carrot, or rather a hallucination of a carrot. "You think you're smart," Preston said, his voice dropping to a low, mocking rumble. "You think you're safe? You think Thorne Enterprises is finished because of a little cash flow problem?" He laughed, a harsh barking sound. "We have a deal in place, Elias. A deal that will make this company untouchable. We are being acquired. A massive injection of capital is coming. We are just finalizing the terms." He paused for effect, waiting for me to look impressed. "Vanguard Holding," he said. "Ever heard of them?" My heart stopped for a single beat, then resumed with a slow, heavy rhythm. I kept my face perfectly blank. I had practiced this face in 1,000 mirrors. "Vanguard Holdings," I repeated, letting the name roll off my tongue like a foreign word. "Yes," Sterling crowed, sensing a shift in the wind. He stepped forward, bolstered by his father's confidence. "They've been buying up our debt for 18 months. They see the value in our brand. They know a winner when they see one. They're sending a representative here today to finalize the acquisition." Once Vanguard takes over, we'll have billions in backing. Billions? They're buying your debt, I asked, feigning ignorance. That sounds risky for them. It's strategic, Preston snapped. They're going to recapitalize us. We won't even need the Montana money eventually, but we need it now to bridge the gap until the ink dries. Vanguard wants a clean balance sheet before the official takeover. I see, I said. And this representative, when do they arrive? Any minute, Preston said, checking his gold Rolex. Mr. Kincaid. He's coming to make the announcement during dessert. It will be the crowning moment of the Jubilee, a partnership that will shake Wall Street. Mr. Kincaid, I said. I believe I've read about him. He's an operations specialist. He's a shark, Sterling corrected, grinning. Just like us. He understands that to make an omelet you have to break a few eggs. He's coming to help us crush the competition. I looked at the three of them. Preston arrogant and blind, Cordelia desperate and cruel, Sterling incompetent and fearful. They were boasting about their savior. They were puffing out their chests, convinced that this mysterious Vanguard Holdings was their ticket back to the top of the food chain. They had absolutely no idea. They didn't know that Vanguard Holdings wasn't a Shark Tank of Wall Street raiders. They didn't know that Vanguard was a reference to the name of the boat Grandfather Silas used to row on the Gallatin River. And they certainly didn't know who Mr. Kincaid reported to. So, Preston said, leaning back against his desk, crossing his arms, here is the reality, Elias. You sign the paper, you take your $3 million, and you go back to your sad little apartment. Because once Vanguard signs that check, we will be gods again. And you will be nothing. You will be the man who walked away from a dynasty.